Jeff, it's Dennis from the Australian Rock Show. How are you?
Dennis, good. How are you doing, man?
Very well. Nice to have you back on the show. We've got you on the phone today to talk about your new publication on Malcolm Young titled The Man Who Made ACDC. I think you've done a fantastic job in getting much of his life story down in print. I assume you're content with the finished result and to have it out there?
Yeah, I am. But like with most books, I'm learning just a little bit more once I've finished it. That happens all the time. Learned some more interesting information about Malcolm's family coming over from the UK and things like that, which maybe I can add into an update. But generally speaking, my goal was to, I guess, reveal two things. Malcolm's key role within ACDC, the fact that he really was the driving force of the band, and document a lot of those decisions and key movements that he made. And also just reveal as much as I could possibly learn about the man himself. And, if I get that middle ground between those two and get it right, which I think I've done, hopefully I've revealed a lot more about Malcolm Young than was known beforehand.
Now, the last time we spoke was at the time of release of your book on Angus Young, and coincidentally, it was only a short time after both Malcolm and big brother George had passed away as well. Yet, amazingly, life in the AC/DC camp seems to have marched on, and it looks like we will have a new album and world tour announced sometime very soon. Yeah,
it's really interesting. I'm of the school that without Malcolm, it feels a little bit odd. It just doesn't quite feel like AC/DC. But at the same time, I totally get it. Angus is now really, he's always been the focal point of the band, but now Angus is really he adopted, I guess, Malcolm's role as the driving force of the band. And Angus has never done anything else in his life. AC/DC been in his life since he was a teenager, and he's now deep into his 60s. I think his attitude is like that of, say, the Stones or the old bluesmen. Why do I have to stop? What's forcing me to stop? If I can still play and still enjoy it, and we still draw big crowds, and we're not embarrassing ourselves, there's no harm in doing what we're doing. There's still a demand for it, as their recent tours have shown. Hundreds of thousands of people are still coming to see AC/DC. And I think if they lost Angus, then you're looking at, a facsimile of the band. But I guess he's the last man standing, and I wrote about that in my book about Angus. So I figure his mindset is, well, if I can keep doing it and people are still interested in the other members of the band, and it looks like, from my understanding, it's going to go back to that Brian Johnson, Phil Rudd, and I don't know about Cliff Williams. I thought he retired, but it looks like he's playing on the new record. If it goes back to that lineup and with nephew Stevie in again, it'll feel like AC/DC. So who's to stop them? And, they've become such a brand anyway, such an enterprise, that it's not just the members of the band that, are benefiting from AC/DC. There's a lot of people involved with that band now. So a lot of livelihoods are dependent on AC/DC. And I think Angus, given his background and Malcolm's background as, working class guys, would understand that and appreciate it and probably do what he can to maintain that.
Let's rip into the book. And to start with, I wish to make mention of the striking cover photo, wonderful live shot of Malcolm taken by renowned photographer Ron Pownell. I think you've chosen a shot which sums Mal up perfectly, very much focused and in the zone. How hard was it to get the perfect picture for the cover art?
There was quite a few contenders, that's for sure. We're definitely looking for a performance shot because, Malcolm is not the kind of guy to happily stand around in a photographic studio and have portraits taken of him. That was never really his thing. And really, we know Malcolm as the guy on stage with the big Gretsch and the black T-shirt and the jeans and the working man boots and the hair flopping in his eyes. So we got the signature shot. There was one other photo that really was the only other option when it came down to the final cut, and that was a shot by Bob King, renowned Australian photographer, and it was a much earlier shot, and we called it the triple threat because it was Malcolm, guitar slung over his shoulder, beer in one hand and a cigarette hanging out the corner of his mouth, and he looked like he was really ready for action. But it just didn't work. The design of a book cover is quite a unique thing, and it just didn't work in that format, regardless of how great a photo it was. So I think ultimately we made the right choice, and it's pretty striking. Plenty of red and black, AC/DC's colours, a bit of white as well. If you look at most AC/DC books, you'll see those colours are used, and it is a signature look for them. But the photo itself took a lot of deliberation, and there were a lot of contenders, but ultimately it just came down to that and the Bob King shot, and I think we made a really good choice.
You did, and the shot, by the way, is from the Orpheum Theatre in Boston, Saturday the 11th of October 1980, and Saxon opened up that show, by the way. I researched it.
Wow, you know your stuff, don't you?
Now, may I say
Saxon.
it's fitting...
Hang on. Who was Saxon? Saxon.
Classic,
Were they like
new wave of British heavy metal, UK.
Okay,
yeah.
So I'm thinking Anvil, but yeah, not Saxon. Yeah.
Now, may I say it's fitting that the first book written on Malcolm, and I know others will follow, was written by a suburban Sydney boy raised in the 1970s, but really... what gives the book a level of authenticity is that you had guys like Mal's former Velvet Underground bandmate and lifelong friend Herman Kovac contributing. Outside of family, probably the guy who knew Malcolm better than anyone.
Yeah, and look, firstly, what you said is absolutely true. As my career has progressed, I found myself drawn to characters and figures that I can identify with as a suburbanite myself, a working class guy. And I think of people like Malcolm and Angus, and also Shirley Strawn, who I wrote about. Even the guys from Silverchair, they may be from Newcastle, but they're working class guys, and I understand that mindset pretty clearly. And I think I find it a bit more comfortable to write about rather than say, I did a book on Johnny O'Keefe, who was from a well-heeled part of Sydney society. And that was a bit different for me because I didn't really understand his background fully. Whereas someone like Malcolm and Angus, I get it. I really do. I can relate. In fact, my father was a spray painter, as was Malcolm and Angus's father. So it was a funny accidental connection. But yeah, I think Herm, going back to the key sources for the book, Herm was a stroke of great good fortune. I knew him from different projects, and I knew that he had some kind of relationship with Malcolm, but I didn't realize how profound it was. It stretched over 40 years. And I think it's fair to say that someone in Malcolm's position probably didn't have a lot of friends outside of the band. When you're engrossed in something as all-encompassing as ACDC, and let's face it, it was his life for probably a good 20 years. Maybe they slowed down a little bit in the 90s, but probably, for the mid-70s through to that period, he lived and breathed the band. He was the driving force. He was the guy making the key decisions. He was the guy coming up with those great signature riffs. He lived and breathed it, as did Angus. And it's pretty hard to forge any kind of relationships beyond the record company, your management, the people within the band, the crew. And they're still business associates, and particularly when you're in a position like Malcolm where you're calling the shots, it's pretty hard to forge any real personal relationships. But Herm had that with him right up until the end. And Herm and Malcolm's relationship was interesting because they worked together in a band called the Velvet Underground, which did not feature John Cale or Lou Reed. But they reached a point while working together where Herm wanted to take the band in a more pop direction, and there was the opportunity to become essentially the backing band for Ted Murray, who was a big pop star at the time. And Malcolm said, that's not what I want to do. I'm interested in harder, bluesier, heavier stuff, and I don't want to be anybody's support band. And so they reached this interesting point in their relationship, and they were very tight. They were really, really close, where Herm and Malcolm realized that while they couldn't work together anymore, they could remain friends. But if they kept working together, and in fact Malcolm invited Herm to join the earliest version of AC/DC, Herm said it wasn't the kind of music I wanted to play. And if you look at later work of TMG, that makes sense. They went in a different direction. But he said, I knew that if I didn't work with Malcolm in AC/DC and stayed in TMG, we'd stay friends. And that's exactly what happened. And Herm, not only did he's a great raconteur, he supplied some fantastic stories for the book, but he also supplied some terrific photographs. And interestingly, at the moment, we've been talking for probably the last 6 months. Herm, during the process of working with me, uncovered a 5-track recording of Malcolm with the Velvet Underground, doing some demos in the garage that have never been heard before. And we're really trying hard to get some kind of official release of that, which I think would be a fantastic historical document in Malcolm's musical evolution. So fingers crossed that might finally see the light. Things get complicated when someone's passed on, of course, and, there's a copyright issue and so on, but there's a possibility that those 5 tracks will see the light of day.
Were they reel-to-reel recordings recorded at Mona Vale?
Yeah, they would have been done up at Herm's place, that's right. Okay. So I think he's got, they may exist on a cassette or something now. They're pretty rough. I've heard one of them. They're pretty rough, but with modern technology, I'm sure they can be polished to, reasonable quality. And like I say, as a historical document, we've never heard outside of, say, the Marcus Hook Roll Band. We've never heard Malcolm on many other records at all, apart from some Vander and Young productions. So I think it's important. I think that people would really love to hear it and really love to know what he was doing before he put AC/DC together.
We will. I'm going to touch on Velvet Underground a little bit after, but Jeff, we did kick off this show with Rockin' in the Parlor, and I specifically aired that because it is from the very beginning of AC/DC's recording career, and also because the song significantly features Malcolm on lead guitar. Not a lot of people know that Malcolm was also a great lead guitarist.
Yeah, but he realised it came to a point where he knew how good Angus was and how suited Angus was to lead guitar. And also, I think Malcolm really was influenced by Big Brother George, who was the rhythm guitarist in the Easy Beats. And I think he really wanted to emulate him. He saw Malcolm and Angus saw the relationship that George and Harry had in the Easy Beats. George was the rhythm, Harry was the colour on lead guitar. And they decided those were the roles they wanted to embrace in AC/DC. You are right, there's a few recordings where Malcolm plays lead guitar, and in fact, he plays a lead guitar break on the first part of Evie, the Stevie Wright song, which I didn't know about until I started working on the book. So, occasionally he takes a lead, but I really think he knew that his power, if you like, his magic was in his right hand, coming up with those amazing riffs.
When we just spoke about Herm Kovac, when we chatted with Herm some time back, he told me that Velvet Underground would sometimes do Can't You Hear Me Knocking by the Stones live, and there's a long jam in that song, and Mal would be the one wailing away on that solo at the end. And as a side note, Malcolm's earliest recordings, we just mentioned the recordings with Herm, but they are of great interest to music historians like myself, and people often state that Mal's first recording was with the Marcus Hook Roll Band. Now, I guess in terms of an official release, that's true, yet, as you would know, you just mentioned Herm has those reel-to-reel recordings of Mal with the Velvet Underground, which predate the Marcus Hook Roll Band. And longtime TNG and Velvet Underground roadie Ron Clayton told me that the band, with Malcolm on board, had gone into United Sound Studios in Piermont with producers Spencer Lee and Cut Freeze All Right Now, which was never released. We can live in hope that maybe those recordings may see the light of day as well.
Oh, look, knowing Herm, the fact that he's such a great chronicler of things and a historian, he's probably got that on another shelf in his garage. Because it was in his garage that he found this recording of the Velvet Underground. So Who knows what he might unearth. So, yeah, they're great. I mean, hey, look, it's not Back in Black. It's not Highway to Hell. But It's, I think, a really interesting and revealing stepping stone along the way from Malcolm progressing his way to AC/DC. So, yeah, I think they're pretty important documents.
Before we move away from Velvet Underground, I do wish to make mention of Mal's fellow guitarist in that band, Les Hall, who would go on to find fame in TMG with Herman. He shared his technique with Malcolm, and in my opinion, one of the best rock guitarists in Australia, who never gets the accolades and deserves way more recognition. Yeah,
TMG, they're looked at in a kind of funny way, aren't they? They're looked at as kind of a countdown pop band, but, they were in essence a rock and roll band, a couple of guitars, bass player, drums, the really simple format that AC/DC also adopted. Ted Murray, he could get down with the best of them. It's just that their signature songs were pop songs, Jamaican Rung, Jump in My Car, Startown Strutter's Ball, and so on. But they operated in that same environment as AC/DC, the clubs and pubs of the 70s and the mid-70s, which were pretty lively places, and it could get, what was the term? Things would get a bit tropical sometimes, and you needed to play hard and fast. But they were also part of the Albert staple as well. They worked with Harry Vander and George Young. So they understood, and they were probably drawing from similar influences, although Herm himself admits that he had more of a pop inclination. But at the same time, they were operating in a similar environment. And you're right, they probably don't get the recognition they deserve as players. The simple fact that Herm at 70 is still drumming with TMG and still playing really, really well. And actually, on that note, I saw JPY and the All-Stars play the Vander and Young songbook a few weeks ago, and it was fantastic. JPY's, I think he's 69, going on 70. His voice is in great shape. He had no issues tackling stuff as challenging as the three parts of Evie and Walking in the Rain, some of the flash in the pan stuff, which is, really a bit more complicated than Pasadena. And yet there he was, and he and the band, which includes Pig Morgan, from back in the day, and the guitarist.
Ronnie Peel? Is Ronnie Peel still in that lineup?
I think he is, yeah. And these guys have been around for a long time doing it, and they nailed it. They really, really nailed it. And any band that can shift between Long Way to the Top and Love Is in the Air within the same set, and pull them both and deliver them brilliantly, that's a lot of skill. That's, a lot of talent. There's a lot of talented musicians. And I think, in fact, it was such an essential at that era, that Albert's era, if you like, to be able to play really well and really hard and really fast in some instances was an absolute essential, and maybe not as crucial these days. Back then you really had to hit an audience over the head.
One final thing about those days from Velvet Underground, and I could talk about this stuff all day, but a hugely significant incident in rock and roll history occurred between Mal and Les Hall at the Manly Youth Centre on Sydney's Northern Beaches, where Velvet Underground, playing their first gig as the renamed Pony. This is where Malcolm, who was unhappy, I believe, with his guitar sound, acted on Les Hall's suggestion, which was to try plugging his Red Gretsch into Les's Marshall amplifier, and that is where the origins of Malcolm's guitar sound originated, ACDC sound.
I'm citing you for the update of the book. That's in. That's a great. I didn't know that story.
Didn't know that?
My favorite story from that time was the Trust You Once purchase scheme, which I thought was really interesting. Herm had a contact at a music store up at Brookvale, and the guy said essentially, whatever you want to buy, as long as you put down a down payment and can promise me that you'll make a payment every month, we call it the Trust You Once system. If you do it and you make your payments on time, you walk away with a great bit of equipment, and then you can come and buy again. And that's how Mal got his first big rig. And there's a photo of him with it in the book, and it just towers over him. I mean, the thing's a monster. And, Malcolm is not the tallest of men, And just the thing looks just like, if you're a kid, and he was a teenager at the time, and you're starting out in a career as a guitarist, it's exactly the rig you want. It's a beast. And, so it was all bought on trust, if you like. And again, Herm, a key player in that.
Jeff, the very early days of Mal's life, late 50s, early 60s, in the tough working class area of Cran Hill in Glasgow, never gets much attention, but those formative years really helped to shape him, didn't they?
Yeah. I was trying to find as much as I could about that, because it's really interesting. I mean, soccer and music were his obsessions, there's no doubt about it. And in fact, subsequent to writing this book, I've learnt that it wasn't Malcolm's parents who were the big motivators to come over to Australia. It was, in fact, brother George and older brother John. They were the ones who heard about the 10-pound POM scheme and really encouraged the family to come over. But what is interesting, and again, I've learned subsequently to writing the book, is that brother John, who was a bit older, let's just say that before they applied and they signed all the documents and they got ready to go, brother John got into a bit of a scrap and ended up in jail in London for a couple of years and didn't come over with the family. But what happened is, by the time he was released on parole, he contacted the family, who were well set up in Sydney at that time, and said, look, I'm out on parole and they've given me back my passport, and I think they've made a mistake. And within hours, they'd wired over an air ticket, and he got on the plane and never came back to England again.
Wow.
Great young family story that I'd never heard, and I got it from a very, very good family friend, and I have no reason to doubt it. And I thought, isn't that interesting? Because we immediately assumed, as I have, that it was Malcolm's parents that were making those big decisions about relocating, which, without that decision, it's quite possible we'd have no ACDC and no Easy Beats. Who knows?
One wonders what Malcolm's path would have taken, and Angus and George too, had they not emigrated to Australia in June of 63.
Yeah, because Australia was this blank canvas, as far as a music career was concerned. And George, with the Easy Beats, just not fell into it, but certainly created something and met the right people, that being Ted Albert and probably Mike Vaughan, their manager, at exactly the right time. The Beatles had come here and really, the story about everybody who saw the Beatles went out and formed a band. Well, I think that's about right. George and Malcolm were definitely among the people at the Sydney Stadium when the Beatles played. And, within a year, the Easy Beats were the biggest band in the country.
I have singled out a couple of significant moments in his life via your book, which I think many of our listeners may not be aware of. You just mentioned June 64. As an 11-year-old, Malcolm heads along to Sydney Stadium with brother George and sister Margaret to see the Beatles. At that age, it would have been, an incredible experience for him.
Yeah, and at that point, Malcolm himself and George had really been more interested in those 50s rockers. In fact, this is a lifelong obsession with Malcolm, with, Little Richard, Elvis, Chuck Berry, Buddy Holly, the greats. But this really opened his eyes to the possibility of this new kind of rock and roll style, if you like, and also guys who were writing their own songs. That was really important. And, George in particular was influenced by that. And the Easy Beats really became the first Australian band to have big success with their own songs. At that time, everybody was knocking off covers of international hits. Everybody from Billy Thorpe to Johnny O'Keefe was doing that. But George saw that, and obviously George was a massive influence on Malcolm. Malcolm would introduce himself as, "Hi, I'm Malcolm Young, brother of George Young of the Easy Beats." He was incredibly proud of George's achievements. But the Beatles changed everything in Australia, and not just for the Young family, but also in the crowd with the Gibbs. The three Gibb brothers who saw them and went away and went from singing kind of slightly saccharine, formless songs to writing pop songs. Going away and writing stuff like Spicks and Specks that really got the Bee Gees' career started. And 100 local acts who went and saw them and suddenly grew their hair, and stopped wearing the really daggy suits and looked for something a bit sharper, a little bit more contemporary, and really updated their sound and started writing their own songs. It was just such a huge, and you can never understate how important that moment was in Australian and West music history.
I think you summed it up perfectly in one of the pages you wrote. Without the Beatles, the Easy Beats would not have happened, and without the Easy Beats, there would be no ACDC. Now, I just mentioned Big Sister Margaret. At 20 years older than Mal, she played quite a significant role in his life, didn't she?
Yeah, she did. Well, Malcolm's mother was, I won't say infirm, but she had bad health. She had arthritis and rheumatism. Right. So she was bedridden most of the time. So Margaret was really, Margaret's sister, not Margaret the mother, they shared a Christian name. Margaret was really the matriarch of the house. I found out just recently that she was referred to as the Thunder. No one cross Margaret, And there's a story I relate in the book about her, telling Mark Evans, the bassist in ACDC, in no uncertain terms not to ever lay a hand on Angus, which he'd done in jest, but she didn't understand. She certainly weighed into him. Yeah, and she introduced them to a lot of music, as I said. She was the one, when they were back in Glasgow, she was the one going to the local record stores, and at that time, Glasgow being a port, would get a lot of stuff over from the States pretty quickly. There wasn't the internet, there wasn't streaming or any of these services we have now where a record recorded in America today we can hear within hours. Back then there was a real gulf, there was a real time lapse. But Glasgow being a port city, records would come in, she'd get them, bring them home, turn the brothers and the whole family onto them. And she really played an important part, but not just as a musical influence, she was also their protector, if you like. George took on the role of ACDC's, I guess, mentor and producer, whereas Margaret was very protective. And also, she was the one who came up with the name, and she was the one that came up with the idea of Angus wearing his school uniform. These, what seem, relatively minor things, but they were actually significant because these all became part of that signature ACDC look. And the look in the world of popular music is almost as important as the sound.
At 15 years of age, in 1968, Harry Vander buys Mal a Gretsch Jet Firebird.
Yeah, I believe it was a hand-me-down, but again, I found out a little bit more about this, is that George throughout his life saw Malcolm and Angus as his younger brothers, the little brothers, and that, for anybody in that kind of relationship themselves, it can be a little bit complicated sometimes. You're never rated seriously. Actually, that's not fair to say, but you're treated a little bit circumspectly by your older brother. Whereas Harry saw Malcolm quite clearly and went, God, this guy's really good. He's got a real talent. And I think at the time he was just playing a fairly dodgy old guitar, hand-me-down. Whereas Harry had this guitar that he'd used while in the Easy Beats and said, you need this, you need a good guitar. And that, I think, was his introduction to Gretsch guitars. I think Angus also inherited a guitar, maybe not from, but certainly with a bit of Easy Beats history as well, I think. So, these guys were recognised by people like Harry who didn't have that family connection and could look at them quite independently. And beyond knowing that they were family, you could see that they were really good players. They needed some good equipment. So, and I'm pretty sure Malcolm hung on to that guitar for a long, long time. It was a real talisman for him. Imagine, being a 14, 15-year-old kid and getting a guitar used by an Easy Beat. I mean, really, outside of the Beatles, it doesn't come much bigger for an Australian kid growing up at the time.
I don't wish to spoil all the stories in your book, yet one story I liked was when a teenage Mal, obviously proud of George's success, showed off the Easy Beats gold record for Friday on My Mind to a schoolmate by taking it off the wall at home and actually playing it.
Yeah, and gold records, it turns out, don't play so well, and they're not always, what's on the label doesn't always represent what's actually on the record. I think it was Sorry. Did I say it was?
Yeah,
I think it was Sorry.
did.
Yeah, it's like, what the heck is this? But, natural curiosity. I'd like to know what a gold record sounds like. And in this case, it sounds nothing like the record it was given for, which is a pretty funny story. I could just see him, can't you? A couple of school kids sneaking in and grabbing it off the wall, because it's a prized family memento, So, he found out, much to his surprise, that it wasn't Friday on My Mind at all.
Jeff, in your prologue, you write how you found it hard getting your head around the fact that he was dead. I had trouble reading in your book about the latter stages of Malcolm's life, his declining health, which included memory loss, relearning his riffs, and even having a heart condition which required a pacemaker. I imagine it was not easy to write about those things when the subject matter is a guy who always seems so tough and indestructible.
Yeah. This guy seemed to me bulletproof. He mightn't have been big, but he was a powerful character, a real force on stage. People say, he was kind of an invisible figure on stage, but I don't agree with that. To me, he had great presence. It's just he didn't have the flair and showmanship of Angus and Bon Scott before, Brian Johnson came along. But he was quite, he commanded his space on stage. And I write a bit about that. He had his turf just to the right of the drum riser. That was his territory. And heaven help anybody who gets in his way. I could only imagine if, some stage invader got into Malcolm's space, he wouldn't last long. And, he got through all these really tough health issues and his own personal battles with alcoholism. What I really admired was he's a guy, let's face it, most people in the world of entertainment, when they have those kind of troubles, they need interventions. They need people saying, come on, we're going to take you into rehab. You need treatment. In Malcolm's case, it typified the man that he identified his own problems and went, okay, I got to get myself out of the band and into treatment, get myself sorted out, because, this is my lifeblood, ACDC. And I love the fact that when Malcolm did pull out of the band in the 80s to get treatment for alcoholism, he brought a nephew Stevie in, who was an absolute dead ringer for Malcolm as far as I'm concerned. So it's the Youngs are often referred to as clannish, and it was a very clannish, insular thing to do. Get in the nephew who looks a lot like you and get him to play those riffs. And he's still doing it, of course, now. It just seemed very hard to deal and confront the fact that this guy who seemed so bulletproof, who seemed so indestructible, who'd lived through the horrible, death of Bon Scott and a lot of difficulties with, things that I document in the book, like, censorship and all this kind of crazy stuff, and some deaths at one of their shows, and, some really heavy stuff, and losses in his own family, his parents and some of his siblings had died, and just, really serious stuff. And he got through it all, got through his health issues, and then got dementia. It's like, damn, it just seems so unfair. And, here's a guy who's worked all his life, has really established himself, built an empire and become an incredibly wealthy guy, and really, to my mind, probably didn't have a lot of time to really sit, reflect, and enjoy that moment in the sun. He really didn't get that. He was 64 when he died, and the band had they only stopped playing with the band a few years earlier. So, and all he did was quit the band and then get sick. It wasn't like there was a period of retirement where he could, like I say, reflect on everything that had been achieved and be really proud of that. Instead, it was, he got off the road, got sick, and within a few years he was gone. It just seemed really, really unjust. Well, death's a cruel mistress anyway, isn't she? There's nothing you can do about that. But in this case, and with George too, and I thought more about this. George only lived to 70. That's not in these terms, that's just average lifespan. Bon only got to 33. A lot of members of Malcolm's family didn't live much past 50 or so. So it's not like a lot of people. Seemed to be, and Ted Albert too, he died in his early 50s, and he was such a key person in the lives of George and Malcolm and Angus. It just seemed as though a bit, I won't say a curse, but it just sort of a bit unjust. These people didn't really get a chance to really savour their achievements. They were too busy doing it, particularly in Malcolm's case. And then when, he got ill, he It just basically took over his life. This is really, the end is just a great tragedy, I think, because he still wanted to keep going. It was his decision eventually, I can't do it anymore, because he was forgetting the songs that he played for 40 years. Can you imagine what that must have felt like? God, what a kick in the gut.
It was horrible to read, but I think it's safe to say that what so many fans loved and admired about Malcolm was that he never forgot where he came from. He was humble, he was a family man, he stayed loyal and true to himself, he never felt like a pop star and remained unaffected by trends and fashions. The music he created was indicative of that.
Well, fashions in particular, and I love this. There's a Sydney menswear store that only recently shut down called Gowings, right in the centre of the city. And it was your working man's store. It's where you went to buy your fluoro gear, your tradie gear, and your very basic street clothes, And that's where Malcolm shopped right up until the end of his life. He's a guy who could afford to buy the flashiest designer gear, and all he really wanted was some black T-shirts, a few blue singlets, a couple of pairs of blue denims and some work boots, and which I just think is beautiful. That never, ever changed. And he'd go in and do it himself. It wasn't like he'd send some minion to go to the shop for him. And, he had this wonderful, one indulgence. He did buy a couple of beautiful houses in and around Sydney. But what he'd do, he had this place in East Balmain, which used to be a boarding house, which basically took up the entire block, and it had some indulgences, a tennis court, swimming pool, and a studio. But he wasn't there a lot because he was on the road or he was recording. And he'd knock on the neighbour's door and say, look, I'm off on a tour. Here's the keys. The pool's all yours. That's the kind of bloke he seemed to be. And I think that's really a mark of the man, that he was just he never bought into the celebrity stuff. When they got into the Rock and Roll Hall of...
That's right. He went on stage in his singlet amongst an audience of suits.
Everyone's in the penguin suits, and everybody's looking in the band, looking pretty stiff in trying to wear a collar and tie. And he just rocks up in a singlet and blue jeans and does what he's done thousands of times before, and an absolute mark of the man.
Just further to that, Ron Clayton, who I mentioned before, long-time Ted Mowry Gang and Velvet Underground roadie, once told me a funny story which occurred around 83 or 84 when Malcolm showed up at a TMG gig at the Caringbah Inn, unrecognised, and jokingly started heckling his former bandmates and friends. And let me read this piece from Ron's book. In 1983 or 84, we regularly did the Caringbah Inn. One night, TMG did 2 40-minute sets, and to close off the first set, the band did a medley of Resurrection, Shuffle, Baby Please Don't Go. And a short time later, a guy with really long hair and wearing a blue singlet wandered up to the front of the stage yelling out, "It's about time you played something decent, ACDC rules." Actually, Ronnie Rohde tells that story better than me, so let's hear him tell it.
Well, before we move away from ACDC, I love the story in your book where you mentioned that around 83, 84, Malcolm shows up at a Caringbah Inn gig and was jokingly heckling TMG, wasn't he? Saying stuff like, "Play something decent, ACDC rules." That's pretty funny.
Well, it's what was the funny part about it is that nobody there even knew who he was. I mean, he was dressed the same as he is on stage, in his jeans and a little black singlet, which is how he always dressed in Velvet Underground. And he just wandered across the front of the stage, playing some ACDC, man. And nobody in the place even knew who he was. I thought that was the good part.
Jeff, Ronnie's story there shows how grounded Malcolm remained, showing up at a pub, grabbing a beer and having a laugh with his mates. I love that tale. It's one of my favourites.
But, it's really interesting you say this because I'm now working on a book, surprise, surprise, on George Young. And the guys from Dallas Crane told me that George would just anonymously turn up at the back of their gigs. This is in the last 10 years or so. And, they'd be playing in a pub in Melbourne and, hello, there's a gap-toothed bloke with a pretty good tan, bit of grey, silvery hair standing up the back of the room, and it was George Young. So he was doing so, or they didn't heckle, it must be said. But, it was just, they were interested in the music, and there were no way they were going to go to a gig in a VIP kind of capacity, if you know what I mean. There would be no entourage. There wouldn't be, my name's on the door. They'd rock up, they'd pay, they'd get down at the room, have a beer, watch the band, and you've got to admire that because it's so easy to get sucked into that whole celebrity thing particularly when you're a band as big as AC/DC, it would be almost understandable if you kind of got sucked into that vacuum because it's all around you. But somehow Malcolm, Angus, in fact, the entire band, maybe with the exception of Phil Rudd from time to time, poor old Phil had, got a bit wayward at times, but they just had no interest in it. It just wasn't it wasn't their life. They didn't judge themselves by the company they kept, if you know what I mean. They judged themselves by the music they made, the concerts they played, and the fact that they could keep their heads together in the midst of what was a whole lot of craziness.
Mate, in my opinion, we really will never see the likes of Malcolm Young again. After being immersed in the world of Malcolm Young for the past 18 months writing this book, was there anything you learned about him which really surprised you, and I mean in a positive way?
Yeah, sure. I mean, his interest in soft melodic rock early on, that caught my, soft melodic pop, in fact, caught my attention, because you tend to always associate the music that someone produces with, you would imagine, the music that influences them. And in Malcolm's case, that was true in a lot of instances. But early on, and again, this is from his Velvet Underground period, he was really quite taken by stuff like Mrs. Robinson by Simon and Garfunkel and My Sweet Lord and songs
T-Rex.
like that.
He liked T-Rex as well.
Like T-Rex, although, legend has it that he did have a Mark Bolan poster on his wall, but it was a very small poster, he insisted. But, Mrs. Robinson intro, there's that tricky acoustic guitar introduction. Malcolm would spend hours between Velvet Underground gigs, or backstage or in the caravan after the gig, because they all shared caravans, trying to master that little riff at the start. He really, really got obsessed by it. So I thought that was really quite interesting. And just those little stories about, giving the keys to the neighbours, please, the pool's all yours, drinking down at the local pub, shopping at Gowings, all this stuff that it wasn't tokenistic, it was the real guy. That's who he really was. Mark Evans told me a story about, Mark Evans, the former ACDC bassist, told me that he also lived in Balmain, and one day he's walking, this is deep into the 90s, he's walking across the pedestrian crossing and a car screams to a halt, and he looks up, and it's Malcolm driving his son to school. No chauffeur, no limo, no bodyguards, no entourage. It's like, oh, shit, hello. They waved and they carried on. I thought that really sums up the guy. He just wasn't interested in the razzle-dazzle of the show business of it all. And in fact, he'd say in their performance, Angus can have that. He can have the dusty end of the stage. He can have the spotlight. I'm quite happy with where I am and what I'm doing. And it's great. I mean, to be able to be that grounded and also just keep your head in the midst, like I say, of all that craziness, that's a real measure of the man, I think. I think that really is who he was. So I don't think there's a lot of difference between the guy on stage and the guy off stage. Whereas, Angus was quite a different character. On stage, he was this flamboyant, human dynamo, but off stage, he was a quiet, withdrawn kind of character. So, it's a really interesting character studies of both guys.
After his passing, the response from fellow musicians was overwhelming. Bands such as Guns N' Roses, Cheap Trick, and the Foo Fighters performed tributes for him live. But even artists like Stevie Nicks and Billy Joel did tributes. Says a lot about how highly regarded he was amongst his peers.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a really interesting thing. I remember when I worked at Rolling Stone, and it was from 1998 to about 2002, ACDC were in the middle of what was really a live resurgence. Their records weren't selling in huge numbers anymore, certainly not Back in Black numbers, but they were starting to go through this live resurgence, but they were also, for the first time in their careers, getting a lot of credibility. People like Dave Grohl were saying, God, these guys, without them, there would be no Foo Fighters and perhaps no Nirvana as well. Their influence on a lot of key bands suddenly was exposed and revealed by people like Axl Rose and Slash and, all these more contemporary figures. And I thought that was really interesting because, so for the last, and closer to home, you've got guys like Chris Chaney, from The Living End, who just said, oh, absolutely, AC/DC is, that's my touchstone. That's the band that, without them, there wouldn't be a Living End. And I thought that was really interesting and probably quite refreshing for Malcolm and Angus that in the last, 10, 12 years, they got a lot of kudos. And it wasn't just a lot happened when someone died, when Malcolm died, but it was before then as well. They were getting a lot of recognition for being an important band. Aerosmith were name checking them. In the big rock band, and they all had time and respect for AC/DC, which during the 70s and 80s wasn't really that commonplace. I think they were seen as more, it was more about Angus and that personality on stage. It took a while before people stopped and reflected on how important their records were. Keith Richards started name-checking Power Age as one of the best rock and roll records he'd ever heard, and I fully agree with him, by the way. So that kind of stuff happened. And you're right, when Malcolm died, and George as well, everybody took the opportunity to pay their respects. And one of the stories that I really like out of that is that when Malcolm was in the midst of his drinking problems, he had a big flare-up with Nicky Six from Motley Crue. Nicky Six, they were backstage somewhere, and Nicky had tried to bite Angus, and Malcolm intervened and threatened to bite Nicky's nose off. It got really ugly. And that was around the time that Malcolm realised he needed some help. To have a flash point with Motley Crue, it's not a good sign. And so he went into rehab. So when Malcolm died, Nicky Six just tweeted, I think it was, Malcolm Young, great guitar player, R.I.P. badass. And I thought, man, imagine having that on your tombstone. It's pretty good, isn't it? So, there was a lot of respect paid by a lot of people towards ACDC. And, I'm sure any new rock band coming through now, they've got to pay your dues. And also, it's other figures. Jack Black, School of Rock. That was all about ACDC. And to get it into a real Hollywood context, that's pretty interesting too. So probably maybe the last 15 years, last 20 years perhaps, suddenly ACDC had really become a touchstone for rock and roll credibility.
Woven into the social fabric in modern times. But, mate,
have you walked down the street without seeing a black ACDC T-shirt? I swear, every day of the week, I will walk somewhere in the Gong where I live, and there's another one, and on people from 10 to 80. It's not like middle-aged white blokes like me. It's a whole bunch of different people. So their influence is huge.
Mate, we have gone 40 minutes and we should finish up. I would like to say congratulations on getting this book out. If you're a casual music fan or an AC/DC disciple, you're going to learn plenty about the life of Malcolm Young. It covers his whole life, and it's wonderful that his story can live on via this book. You got any plans to do library tours again, Jeff?
Fingers crossed. I've got a couple of bookstore things in the works, but hopefully the publisher will get behind it and I'll be able to do another tour. I didn't get T-shirts made up for the last tour. This time for sure. If
fans wish to follow you online, what's the best way they can do that?
Yeah, just through my website, which is jeffapter.com.au, or through Facebook. Send me a friend request, and if they're having trouble tracking down the book or anything like that, just drop me a line. I can help sort that out for them.
Mate, as you may recall from your last stint on our podcast, every guest on our show gets to select a song by an Australian band, something which is significant to you. What would you like to choose and why?
Well, I'd like to stick with the AC/DC theme if I could. And I'm hoping I didn't choose this for Angus, but Rock and Roll Damnation is a song that I just, throughout the writing of this book, and it was actually a working title for the book for a little while. There's just something about it. It just really sticks in my head. It was, and historically it's interesting too, because it was their first hit in the UK and kind of saved their necks for a while with their international record company. So there's a bit of a backstory to it. It was recorded as an afterthought, but I just think it really captures Bon Scott era AC/DC, I think, moving into what was probably their greatest creative period. And it's just a killer song too. It just sounds fantastic. It sounds like an easy beat song that's been revved up and kind of processed through the Malcolm and Angus guitar mill and comes out the other side. It's a terrific song.
It's a great choice, and thank you for your time today. Good luck with the book, and please keep in touch.
Yeah, thank you, Dennis. It's really good to talk to you.